We've been talking a lot about our system or systems of education, P to 12 separately from higher education, and hopefully part of what this panel will provide is a sense of how those pieces fit together, that it really is an educational continuum as we develop that workforce. So with me we have two presidents from higher education and then two employers. So John Downey is here. John, would you give a wave? The president of Blue Ridge Community College, who's been very involved, by the way, with strategic planning for the community colleges. We have Dr. Tim Sands, the president of Virginia Tech. And Tim has a background, by the way, in material sciences and nanotechnology, which is an exciting area to bring to the table here. And then two employers, Steve Jerome. Steve is the human resource manager for Ball Advanced Aluminum Technologies. They're a supplier of high-quality metal packaging products. And then Dennis Tracy is here with us, the executive vice president and chief sustainability officer for Smithfield Foods, the world's largest pork processor and hog producer. And between the two of you, your companies employ tens of thousands of people. So it's great to have you both with us. So like some of the other panels, we will have a series of questions, and we'll try to keep our answers brief to keep things moving. And you will see some overlap with some of the questions from earlier in the day, which is, I think, quite deliberate, so we can hear the perspectives of higher education working directly with the business community. So maybe we'll start with our two employers first on the first question and then turn to the educators to respond. And the question is, from your perspective, what are the top skills that employers are looking for students to have developed through higher education, and how can we ensure that students are getting those skills? So maybe if our employers could start and then the educators respond.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start off with the answer to that question. I think that learning capacity is far and above the most important. The ability to be able to be presented with a set of facts or a job that needs to be learned, and then to be able to shift and learn something new, and to be able to continually do that on a regular basis, because we're constantly faced with change, and we need employees that can adapt to change quickly and can learn new technologies and such.
Terrific.
At Smithfield, we raise hogs and we make bacon. Most of you think of us as that little ham company down in Smithfield, and a lot of workers with knives and things like that, and that's all true. I will tell you, though, we're looking for people that are experienced in systems now. If you look at what we do, we manage farms with iPads. We cut bacon with computers. It's a very different thing than you have in your mind. And so we look for people who can work within systems that we create. These folks, regardless of where they are in the organization, need to have a larger picture. They need to problem solve. Communication is vital. I mean, every panel I've ever been on, people talk about that, but it continues to be really important. Teamwork, communication. They need to care about the company. They need to want to work in that company. Those are the kind of things that we need out of higher education as they steer students toward professions that are going to suit them. And they need to invest in the long term. We need folks that are committed to do a career with us. Our technical folks, they need sort of a softer side. They need to understand the social skills and the arts. Our art side need to go take a math course. They need to understand the technical side so people can talk to one another. And I guess what I'm saying all told is that we operate in a collaborative model at Smithfield. And it doesn't hurt if we could have some students who come in, or some employees who come in, who have experienced failure at some point in their life. We don't necessarily need the perfect student to come in. We need folks who are resilient, people who can pull themselves up from a difficult situation and solve a problem that nobody else can.
Terrific. So will the educators respond? What are you doing, and does this sound like a good match?
Yes, I mean, I think that everything you just heard resonates with what we're hearing from the larger pool of employers. We're also hearing that most of them think that in the college experience that the student should have an applied learning component to that experience. And We're hearing that more and more. Matter of fact, we just finished a survey of our students, our alumni, around various questions. This was done in partnership with Gallup. And we learned that our alums look back on the experiences they had in college and which ones were most valuable to them. And they talk about applied learning, experiential learning. And so that's something that I think you're seeing on most of our campuses, a much more intense focus on that. Reducing data to actionable information is something that all of our graduates need. It doesn't matter what major you're in, you need to be able to know how to do that. And it involves effective communication. And the last thing I'll just throw out, because I think we'll end up talking about it a little bit, and we had some conversations about it earlier, and these are the skills that an entrepreneur learns. And it's not all about starting companies. We had at Virginia Tech last year, I think we had 56 students started companies. But for all of our students, these entrepreneurial skills are what builds career resilience, allows a student to move, a graduate to move from one career to another and take risks because they know they have the tools that will allow them to make that transition.
I think it's important to think about the skills that are in demand now, but maybe even more important to think about the skills that will be in demand 15, 20, 50 years from now. Experts predict that for every job that will require an advanced degree, there'll be 2 jobs that require a baccalaureate degree, but 7 jobs that will require a sub-baccalaureate degree. But I think it's a big mistake if we pit educational institutions against each other to get to that goal. I think we need to make the skills that are most in demand attractive to individuals to pursue. And one way to do that is to show them how through lifelong learning, you can start out with a certification, build into an associate's degree, and then get a baccalaureate degree. And as educators, I think in particular, we need to listen to the business community and make sure that those seamless pathways are there for people to start out and see a future that doesn't end with just a certification or just a skill. It's a lifelong process for learning and relearning throughout our whole lives.
That's terrific. And a couple of themes that we've already heard emerge here that relate to what we heard earlier in the day. One is the whole concept of engagement. Tim, you talked about what we would call engaged learning as a theory of higher education that is very hands-on. It does involve application of ideas both in and outside the classroom. And you heard about the importance of engagement at work, and I think those two things are directly related. You've also heard, though, this theme of lifelong learning, that one of the things we talk about in higher education, and this may be where there's a little bit of a disconnect or at least something we have to talk about with business, is we're not just preparing students for the first job out of college. We talk constantly about what are those students going to be doing 20 and 30 and 40 years from now. And so that's an important part of the equation from our perspective. And interestingly, when we heard from the employers about the skills they're looking for, those actually match a lot of the things that we've seen in national surveys. For example, Hart & Associates recently did a survey with Fortune 500 companies, and a lot of what you both mentioned came up. Critical thinking, communication skills, both oral and written, teamwork, leadership, problem solving, resilience and grit, creativity and entrepreneurial thinking, and ethical reasoning. So what's interesting about that list is you don't see specific college majors. It's really about more than a major, and in fact, that was the subtitle of that report. So when we think about what we've just heard, then how do we align higher education with the future demands of employers better? Do you have thoughts, and this is open to any of you, how we can create better alignment? Go ahead, Dennis.
I think it's all about partnership. And you can call it all these fancy terms and stuff, but to me it's partnership. And as we, in the private sector, look to the public sector schools and the private sector schools to produce students for us, we get a lot of folks from higher education that come to us and say, what do you need? And that's sort of how it works. They say, what do you need? You answer the question, and they try to give you that. That model is rapidly disappearing. They need to know what we need. And the only way they know what we need is to partner with us, know what we're about. One of the examples I give here is at Virginia Tech, where Dr. Sands is the president. There's one 2-year degree, and it's in ag tech. The reason that evolved is because there was a great discussion with the agriculture community about what they needed. And what they needed were people with a 2-year degree who cared about agriculture, who wanted to be in agriculture, and didn't necessarily want a 4-year degree. Those students have a 100% employment rate when they come out of that program. That's partnering, that's understanding what it is. When I was at Virginia Tech a long, long time ago, I was a co-op student. And I'm a big fan of that to this day. Internships have sort of moved into a world where you work a month for employer A and a month for employer B and a month for employer C. And that doesn't get you too far as I'm concerned. So exposing folks to employers in the long term with a focus so they understand them, they understand their needs, is meaningful not only to the employer, but I would say that it's meaningful to the student as well.
I would second that, and I think that a lot of, we heard a lot of good speakers about public education, and our teachers in our public schools are coming from the higher ed system. What exposure have they had to industry and manufacturing, and have they ever been in a manufacturing facility? And I'd venture to guess that maybe most of them or many of them haven't. And I think that's an opportunity that in itself to better understand what we're doing as employers, to get the educators out there, and then they can see the process and see the connection.
And I'm glad you mentioned the teachers. By the way, we were talking, some of us earlier at lunch, about the fact that we, of course, are the producers of the teachers for the P-12 system, and how important it is that we pay attention to teacher education, because that, of course, has a multiplier effect in society. Every teacher is impacting hundreds and thousands of lives. Educators, what do you think?
Well, I think public policy, I think, has to follow the intended outcome. I think, as we've all heard, begin with the end in mind. I think we need to incentivize the jobs that are in demand and will be in demand, and think backwards from there, and then incentivize educational institutions to work together to make them as seamless as possible. One example of that in our region is we recently signed an agreement with James Madison University in the area of social work, where our human services applied graduates can transfer those credits to James Madison's social work program. A lot of people think of the community college system as a great place where you can start out, do 2 years of general education, and then through the guaranteed admission agreements, get a baccalaureate degree at a 4-year college or university. And that's a great model for many people. We need to replicate that model on the applied science degree tracks, where students who are getting mechatronics and electronics degrees in pre-engineering programs can take those models and move them toward baccalaureate degrees. I think that's one way higher ed can align themselves a little bit better to meet the needs of companies in those areas.
Yeah, I can only build on that. I think the idea of partnerships and deep partnerships is really where we need to go, and we're well on our way. I think if you look at what we're talking about with Go Virginia, with the Business Higher Ed Council, with the national equivalent of that, the conversations are becoming very different, much deeper than they were, say, 5 years ago. We talked to industrial partners, especially in Northern Virginia recently. They're looking at tenure kind of engagements, not the contract and grant thing or little program. They want to embed themselves at Virginia Tech and vice versa. They want to see Virginia Tech people, students, faculty embedded in their institutions. And this requires a different level of communicating and compromising. But I think we're starting to see the beginning of that happening. I just mentioned another couple examples from our institution. Our real estate undergraduate major involves 6 colleges, and the entire industry, all of our grads in that field, it's a huge field for Virginia Tech, have come back and are deeply embedded, providing internships, being mentors, and are really in the classroom. And I think that's a great model going forward. Another is our work in cybersecurity with the Hume Center, where our undergraduates finish with a security clearance. So they are immediately marketable. They can move right out into the industry. And we need to do that across the whole spectrum of higher ed. We're just starting, but I see the future as being all about partnerships.
Yeah, that's terrific. So again, we've heard some common themes here about partnerships, communication, collaboration. Very much the opposite, I would say, of an isolated ivory tower, what you've all been describing. And certainly this model about how we work together is a win-win, I think, from many of our perspectives. In higher education, our students want those hands-on experiences. They want experiential learning and internships, and it's beneficial, of course, to the employers as well. Many of us have these external advisory boards now. For us, every college and many of our academic programs have them, where alumni who are out in the field are meeting with us regularly to have that communication. But I think we should applaud Barry and his colleagues for the mere fact of bringing us together for a conversation like this today. We don't get to do this every day, and it really is valuable for us. So when we think about what we've just talked about, now we're going to turn to some challenges. What do you think is the greatest challenge or challenges in terms of closing, and I will say the skills gaps, because I think there are probably multiple skills gaps that we address, both from the employer perspective and again, from higher ed. Anybody want to start with the skills gaps?
I think first it's the inability to identify opportunities. I mean, we're surrounded with opportunities, especially in manufacturing. And kids coming up through the systems, they don't see the opportunities because sometimes the teachers don't see the opportunities. And how can we better close the gap I mentioned earlier about getting teachers in facilities to see what's going on, to see these opportunities, and better understand the opportunities that are all around us. And I think that's a start.
I heard a great quote yesterday on social media by astronaut Leland Melvin, who said, you can't be what you can't see. And I think where the business community can really help education is help us to market the jobs that are most in demand. In the Shenandoah Valley, we're working with a local television station and the Shenandoah Valley Partnership to market jobs that are in demand in the business community. And then partnering closely with the businesses, provide the opportunities for young people to get involved in those careers. I see that as our greatest challenge, is career and technical education is still so separate from academic education, and we need to integrate the two and make it all one education for all students and not track students with the smarter students going to higher education and the not so smart students going into business and industry. That is an antiquated model that fortunately is changing, but not rapidly enough, I think, for the business community to see the benefits of that. We need to continue to work on that, in my opinion.
Well, I think the gap issue will be, the skills gap issue is going to be addressed by these deep partnerships. I think that actually, that kind of communication starts to eliminate the gap just by the virtue of each side understanding each other better and the pathways becoming much clearer, the obstacles being removed. But I think the real problem, and I have to reflect back on Mike Petter's conversation, is really back at the pre-K level, the real opportunity for closing the gaps. I think if we just are working at the K through 12 and the higher ed community college, we've missed a huge segment of the population. They're just already off the rails. And I think we need to put more attention on that part of the continuum.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We talk about higher ed working with businesses, but also higher ed and P to 12 working together too, and businesses working with P to 12.
My short answer is the inertia of the existing system. I had a hallway conversation. It takes 13 years to start something and get through it with the children that start and go all the way through college or a 2-year program. It's very hard to turn that beast, and it's something that businesses really wish would happen quicker. It's just at the time you get the STEM people coming through, maybe the new thought is a little bit less of that or a little bit changed from what the initial thought was. I attribute that also to following the money. Higher education often follows money, and right, you heard a lot of talk about cybersecurity and important digital issues and big data. Those are all important, but I fear that we're encouraging all of our children to work for Apple and Google. And that's what they want, and if they can't get it, it's a disappointment. And I would, I want them to work at Smithfield. I want Luck Companies wants them to work at Luck Companies. And it would seem to me that this regional approach that's been batted about here today would be really suited to that, which is if we could somehow align the needs of companies in the areas of the schools or in disciplines where the schools have particular expertise that would be a good thing, and encourage folks to study things that might have a direct contribution back in their community.
So you mentioned that inertia is sort of a barrier to working together. You've all talked about partnerships and collaboration, but what are some of the barriers and any suggestions about what we can do, not necessarily just any one of us, but perhaps collectively, to address those barriers to working together more effectively and communicating more effectively?
Well, I think we've taken an important first step by being here today, and I thank you for allowing and inviting me to participate in this. This is a great first step, and I think that the more we talk, the more we understand each other, the better we're able to find solutions.
I think forming the partnerships are the first step, and I think by and large, I think education and business has come together to form those partnerships. Now I think time and money are big obstacles. We've partnered with the Virginia Manufacturing Association on a great training program for entry-level technicians in local manufacturing, which makes up about 16% of the jobs in the local economy where we are in the Shenandoah Valley. Those jobs are high demand, high pay, and it's critical that in order to attract young people into those jobs, it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for us being part of a pilot program where the General Assembly gave us some incentive money for financial aid for young people to enter those programs. Traditionally, you may not realize that credit instruction is funded in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but non-credit workforce training is not funded for any of our institutions. And that's an area where I think it's critical that we look at, because our neighboring states fund those types of programs. And if young people don't have the incentives to go into those programs, and if companies have to pay for them all on their own without any incentive, I think that's going to continue to be a major obstacle.
I think for the research universities, one of the obstacles has been IP policy, intellectual property policy. And it's more, I wouldn't say policy, it's more philosophy. And we've seen a major sea change there. Most of our leading universities in the research sector are now working with companies in a way that eliminates some of the barriers at the front. We're not trying to bleed them in the beginning, but we're looking at long-term partnerships that have benefits that are not just licensing revenue. And so I think that is a major shift in approach over the last 3 or 4 years that will continue to bring us closer to industry. The other area I would just mention is in entrepreneurship and internships. I think there's an overlap there where the foundations and maybe even the state government can get more involved in implanting some of our talented students while they're students into startup companies, into small businesses that can't typically afford to hire an intern and pay them, and that they can transform a company. I've seen that happen, and it works both ways. They learn the skills, they're deeply invested, the student is, in the success of that small company, and gets them started off with a lot of momentum.
I'll just add, the previous panel addressed this. I think the challenge for higher education is the same as it is for high school and before that, which is who's the customer. And business has not really been thought of as a customer, but perhaps we should be. We'd rather be viewed as partners, not customers in this. But the more you invite business in, I think the better result you'll get. I also think, often forgotten in these discussions, is the obligation that business has to be prepared to receive the kind of students that you're producing. We don't talk about that much. We need to make sure we have diverse workplaces. We need to make sure that we are training people once they get there and receive them and treat them in the way that makes them want to stay. The only way that we can learn from each other is to share those kind of insights and those difficulties with each other and make sure that we're producing not a pipeline of students, but a variety of students that are adaptable, can go on to job after job, and have a transferable set of skills that they'll keep their entire career.
That's terrific, and it actually leads to the next question, and this will go specifically to our employers for starters, and that is, what necessary skill, or it may be more than one, do you find that recent graduates are most lacking and that you feel you have to do sort of in-house training to make up for, and any suggestions for us on that front?
Well, we heard about engagement before and being present in their job, and I think that's an important skill, and it's also important for new hires to be able to understand the multicultural, the global economy that we're operating in, and how that affects their job at home. And we've developed a relationship with Blue Ridge Community College, and one of the instructors there who's been instrumental in that has been in industry before and able to relate to the new employees and able to make a connection, and I think that's really important.
I think it's leadership. That's cliche to say, everybody says it, but at all levels, whether you're cutting bacon on the floor or whether you're a lawyer up in the fancy office, I think leadership is the thing that we really need. And there's a lot of talk about teamwork, and millennials like to work in groups and they like to collaborate, and they do. And we've got to adapt to that as businesses. But we also need autonomy and the ability to figure things out on their own instead of waiting for instruction. And I fear that we're not getting that. And at Smithfield, we're sort of a fill the gaps culture, which is if a gap is created, somebody will gravitate to it and fill it, and those people are the ones that rise in our organization. If you look to do that, you have to be a self-starter. You have to move in new directions. It's hard to teach that. I think you experience that throughout your educational life and in your family life. I talked to a young colleague of mine this morning, and she said, it's helicopter parents, Dennis. They've ruined everything. They said as soon as the student fails or something goes wrong or they get a B, they're like all over it. And that's what I said earlier. I think we could stand a little failure in our system to build character and build problem-solving techniques that are going to benefit everybody.
Terrific. Any quick responses before we go to our lightning round question from our educators?
Well, I think to Dennis's point, that's why we're focusing on entrepreneurship. Again, not because we expect every student to start a company, but we're trying to build those skills that allow them to be autonomous and to be able to make their case and to build up some confidence too, and resilience to failure. Those are all really important characteristics. Then I think most of our institutions, I know James Madison is a leader in that as well. That's going to be, I think, a critical part of every student's experience.
I think for us, it's the seamlessness is that we're getting much more effective at listening to business and industry and then reaching down to K-12 and reaching up to universities to try to make that as seamless as possible, the whole experience.
Great. Okay, so quick answers to this question, the lightning round. What actions can the General Assembly take that would make the most meaningful difference in closing the skills gaps that we currently face?
Incentives, resources available to form these partnerships that we've talked about, I think is critical.
Community college system is putting in a proposal to fund non-credit training like our neighboring states. But what's innovative about it is we don't want funding based on input, but based on output. And we were proposing that we would get funding for each certification and non-credit business and industry certificate that we give that business has endorsed. And so we're hoping that that kind of action by the General Assembly will result in more people starting toward those 7 jobs I talked about, and then going on to get a baccalaureate degree, and then going on to get an advanced degree as well.
I think the General Assembly can be, and the state in general can be a catalyst and a convener. And one huge opportunity for us in regional economic development, there's a lot of that in Go Virginia, is to be able to help the different sectors work together to lower some barriers that are in some cases created by the state, maybe not intentionally, but lowering those barriers, providing seed funding so that we can work together across those sectors. I'll give an example of what we're doing in Roanoke with Carillion, the Virginia Tech Carillion partnership. And we're trying to grow that, and there are barriers present that I think that the General Assembly can help us lower.
Terrific. Dennis, you get the last word.
I would agree with that. I think incentives to build a new model is what the General Assembly can do, whether it's Go Virginia, which is we've talked a lot about, to make sure people are talking and collaborating and inventing new models. Smithfield's a global company. We're all over the world. And I come back to that phrase we heard 30 years ago, think globally, act locally. And I think there's a lot of application for that here in Virginia, and the General Assembly can help us get there by incentivizing people to collaborate in a way that's meaningful for education, water, waste treatment, whatever the issue may be. And hopefully they got a model with this new plan.
Terrific. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your insights, and I think we've seen the need for this kind of communication and collaboration. So thank you guys for your insights. Appreciate it.